So, Bill, if I can start with you, why is performance reporting important in building trust in the public sector?
Put simply, they spend public money, but we don't stop there. What do they spend public money on? Well, a lot of government agencies deliver public services. They exercise executive power, so some they have the power to tax, they have the power to levy, some have the power to provide grants, transfer payments. So they're moving money around. Others are regulators, and they license, they confer rights and impose obligations. So what we're talking here is the exercise of state power. So they spend public money, they exercise state power, and in a democracy they do that by the consent of the public.
Yes,
so if the public wants government to hold this sort of power, they want to be able to trust them. So how do you gain trust? Well, you've got to earn it. And how do you earn it? Well, you've got to demonstrate that you're trustworthy, that you can be trusted. How do you demonstrate that you're trustworthy? Well, you need to provide an account of yourself. That's one way of doing it, and one way of providing an account of yourself is to report accurately and transparently on your performance.
Great. What developments are there affecting performance reporting?
What has happened with the legislation is that it's loosened up a little bit, and it's tried to provide a bit more flexibility.
Right.
So one of the concerns with the old legislation is that it used a bunch of technical terms, and one of the criticisms of that was that some agencies took a kind of a mechanistic rule book approach to performance reporting. And if you take a rule-based mechanistic approach, you're very rarely going to get a rich performance report, the sort of performance report that we're looking for. So by loosening things up and saying to agencies, well, you need to give an assessment of what you intend to achieve, opens up the field for the agencies to make some very thoughtful judgments about what's most important, what sort of achievements are most important in terms of the minister, in terms of the customer, in terms of the stakeholder. What are the important things to report? And so the legislative requirements have helped to facilitate more flexibility in that. What we also have seen in the last couple of months, I think February, the XRB released an exposure draft on service performance reporting. Submissions on that exposure draft are open until the end of July this year. That is a reporting standard, or a proposed reporting standard, which is largely principles based, although it does propose to mandate more specifically the reporting of outputs and impacts and the linkages between the two.
Okay, thank you. So what does good performance reporting look like, Bill?
Ask yourself what are the properties of good communication. Again, as I've said, a mechanistic approach and a rule book based approach won't get you there. You will get so far by looking at somebody else's example of a good report, but in the end it's got to start with a thoughtful expression of your own business, an understanding of what your business model is, what your value chain is, and by that I basically mean a description and a picture of how your organisation organises resources to achieve what it sets out to achieve.
Right. And if you can look at that from the perspective of a user of those statements or reporting, then all the better.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
So the user perspective is very important here.
The user perspective is critical, and then we get into these, the other, the qualitative characteristics again. So we talk about relevance. What's relevant to the user? What's important to them? What do they see you should be held to account for?
Great. Okay.
Yeah, and it needs to be understandable, plain English.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Bill. Marcus, I mean, if I can turn to you, I mean, what has our recent work found about performance reporting in the public sector about financial assets?
Well, our report looked at the management and governance practices across 14 financial asset intensive entities in the public sector. We generally found that all 14 entities had good management and governance practices. However, there was some room for improvement, particularly in the area of transparency. And by transparency, we meant not the quantity of information, but the quality of it. Financial assets are very complex, and there are a lot of them, and they are frequently traded. So being able to summarise these financial assets in a way in which users can usefully use them and understand them is a very difficult task. But it is a very necessary one. All of what you've been talking about here is a huge challenge for many entities that hold financial assets.
So, Marcus, what opportunities are there to improve reporting about the performance of financial assets?
Well, I think from the user's perspective, we continually hear that they can't see the wood for the trees. We need to look at what these financial assets are, how they're being used, and why they're being used.
Yeah.
If I could mention the New Zealand Super Fund as a good example of an entity trying to communicate with its users, with the public, in a very simple way, it would be worth having a look at their website and how they communicate their performance.
Great, thank you.